Hey, I'm Pitter and this is my fight guide for E12S, the Oracle of Darkness. I realize I'm making this an expansion late, but better late than never. To begin the fight, you'll pull Gaia to the south, and she will begin casting Hell's Judgment, which will put everyone on 1 HP, before immediately following this with Shockwave Pulsar, which will be a recurring AOE for this fight. If you've done E2S, you may already be familiar with the spell in waiting mechanics. Gaia will do this here, where she will essentially telegraph a mechanic, but it won't resolve immediately, and instead will be prepped for later. For this first spell in waiting, there are two possibilities. It can either be stacks or spreads. In this case, it is stacks, and specifically, she is casting Dark Water 3, which will be placed in waiting. And then she'll follow with another spell in waiting, and place the opposite effect on your party. So in this footage we had stacks for the first one, so here we will have spreads. And at the same time, that initial spell in waiting will be timing down, so you need to stack or spread accordingly. Here you want the party to move under the hitbox, and have the tank stand outside of the hitbox in the south. This is because she will cast Darkest Dance, which will target the player furthest from herself, and hit them for a large AOE, and then she will immediately follow this with a knockback, and the final spell in waiting will resolve. After all this, have your tank pull her to the center here. She'll cast a Shockwave Pulsar, and then she'll go into casting Basic Relativity. And this will be our first mechanic dump of the fight. All the relativity casts hurt throughout this fight, so be sure to mitigate. Alright, so Basic Relativity will place a bunch of debuffs on all of the players in the party. What these are and what they do can be seen on the side. 2 of your DPS will get Dark Fire 3, 2 of your DPS will get Dark Blizzard 3, and then the tanks and healers are interchangeable. 1 pair will get this Shadow Eye, which I like to call Gaze, and the other pair will get Dark Water 3. Everyone will get returned. For the strategy demonstrated here in this breakdown, it doesn't really matter what the tanks and healers have, and they can effectively ignore what they have, so long as they stand in the indicated spots. The DPS will have to note which debuff they have, but also the timer on their debuff. It is random whether or not ice or fire goes off first. In this footage, ice has a 30-second timer, and fire can be seen here with a 15-second timer. The other thing of note here are these mirrors or traffic lights around the outside of the arena. There will be 7 of them, 6 of which will be coloured red, and a single one that is coloured yellow. For the purposes of this mechanic, you will treat the yellow one as north. What these do is that they shoot a laser beam at whoever is closest to these. And Gaia casts Speed here, which will tether 2 of the mirrors with a yellow tether, and 2 of them with a purple tether. The yellow tether will instance first, and shoot their lasers first. The purple tethers will instance last, and the untethered mirrors will instance second. The east and west mirrors will always be tethered yellow, whereas it is random whether it is the north side, that is the side closest to the yellow mirror, or the south side that is tethered purple. The tanks should note which side is purple, as they will have to bait these. We will have the DPS with the ice debuff bait the first towers in the east and the west. You can have a priority system, or just call this out on the fly to which side they are going to. If the fire debuff has the short timer here, like seen in this footage, they need to pull off to the southeast and the southwest, so that they don't hit anyone with the explosion. Once that is resolved, the DPS should join the tanks and the healers on the north side of the arena, who should already be set up like seen here. You want your healers off to the side on the way markers, as indicated here. The DPS should stack in front of the boss's hitbox, and the tanks in max melee behind them. Our tanks pulled off a little bit further in this footage because they were the ones with gaze and wanted to be extra safe, but it is not necessary. But anyway, gaze resolves here, and return will snapshot or capture, I suppose, the spots that we're standing at. And the healers, by standing off to the side, would have baited the correct traffic lights beams. Next, the yellow traffic light will force the party away. If fire had the longer debuff timer, they would need to make sure that they pull out of the party here so that they don't cleave anyone. However, ice had the longer timer in this footage, and so the party needs to stack, and the tanks want to bait those final traffic lights. Return will take us back to those spots before, and then the yellow mirror will do a big pushback, and then party splits for your water debuff stacks. Congratulations, that's one of the harder mechanics out of the way. Next you'll do a shockwave pulsar. And then she'll cast Singular Apocalypse. This will change the decoration on the floor, and there will be a light coming from the center, which will path around the arena. This pathing indicates where AoEs will explode. She'll also face a random cardinal and begin casting Cataclysm. She'll jump in this direction and do a huge AoE, so the party needs to run to the opposite side of the arena. Having noted the pathing of the light, the melee can go to the side that is going to be hit last. And she'll begin casting Black Halo on the main tank. This should just be invulned, but if this is not possible, you can just take it as a shared tank buster. After that first explosion in the middle, the party will rush center to stack Shell Crusher, and then immediately spread out for the second hit, while noting that AoEs are still pathing around the arena. And that concludes Singular Apocalypse. Leave the boss on the wall here to set up for the next mechanic, and we will treat where she is as north. So after that bit of downtime, she'll begin casting Intermediate Relativity. I sure hope you like debuff soup. Okay, so everyone will get 4 debuffs. Everyone will have a Dark Eruption, that's the AOE Spread mechanic from the very start if you remember. And everyone will have a Return 4. This essentially functions the exact same way as the previous return did, just with multiple captures this time. As for the remaining debuffs, while these are all random, the tanks and healers will share the same set, and the DPS will share the same set. Both Gaze and Ice are returning as possible debuffs here, but we also see Wind, which is a large AoE around the player, an AoE that's larger than Fire, and Flare, which functions just as Flare does anywhere else in this game. It's proximity damage from that player. And Unholy Darkness, which is essentially just a stack marker. Now one final thing to note is that in that set of players who have the flares, which is the tanks and healers in this footage, one of them will instead have the Unholy Darkness. And to resolve this mechanic, we essentially want to work backwards from the highest debuff, placing it down and capturing that spot with the return, to the lowest debuff. Now from my point of view, I have Gaze with the highest debuff, so I'm going to stand center with the other DPS. It is important that we are a little bit spread out, not too much. Flares and the stack are opposed to Gaze, so the tanks and the healers will have this with the highest timer, and those with the flares will position around the outside of the arena, and because of the way we've positioned the boss, the tanks can keep uptime, and that one player with the Unholy Darkness will stack center with the DPS. Next highest on the DPS is Wind, so we will go to the outside of the arena in designated spots. Again, because of how we've positioned the boss, the melee can keep uptime. Perhaps a better way to put this is to say that you want a player with Wind in each intercardinal. Again, treating the boss as north here. Ice is opposed to Wind, so the tanks and the healers will be stacking center. Finally, Dark Eruption, and for this everyone just simply needs to spread. And then the rewinds will happen, and hopefully you'll get a good view of everything resolving itself here. One thing to note is that as the final debuff is going off, you just need to make sure that you're looking out of the arena so that when you get back to the step that had Gaze, that you're not looking at anyone else. But that concludes Intermediate Relativity. Some more downtime with just a bit of AOE, and be sure to recenter the boss here. Next is Dual Apocalypse, and as the name implies, there'll be two lights pathing around the arena this time. Once again, she immediately follows this with Cataclysm, so make sure you go opposite to wherever she's facing. In this footage we get the good light path, but if we had gotten the bad light path, where the light comes towards the safe spot and where she jumps to, then once it was safe to do so, we would have to rotate around one cardinal position. After the middle explosion, the party will quickly rush center, and then she will cast Somber Dance, which is essentially a tank buster. First it'll hit the player who is furthest from the boss, so this should be one of your tanks, and then it will hit the player closest to the boss, and this should be your other tank. So everyone needs to be mindful of where they're standing here. This all concludes with a stack and spread, just like from the first Apocalypse, but I think you'll find it easier this time. Okay, Advanced Relativity. So the first thing to notice when you get here is the traffic lights circling the center of the arena. Two of them will be opposite each other that are tethered yellow. These are the only two that you need to worry about. And what you want to do is essentially have half the party run towards it and then the other half run towards the opposite one. And this should be split, one tank, one healer, 2 DPS. Now in terms of debuffs, there's no new debuffs here, it's all things we've seen before. And on the side you can see the 3 different possible patterns. In this footage we see that the DPS all have the fire debuff, but if they had gotten the other set, you would need to assign 2 DPS to potentially float, because each side needs a player with double wind and a player with gaze. Now on each side, the player with double wind will be the furthest player out, whereas everyone else will stack in front, and we'll let this first position be captured. The players with gaze will now move around clockwise, whereas everyone else will move around counterclockwise, and we'll capture our next spot. I'd highly recommend using the lines on the arena's floor to help you work out where you need to be. And finally everyone will go to their last spot and look outside the arena. Now I realize this probably seems confusing and you've only seen, me with the fire debuff here. So on the screen now I've got a picture, a silly little diagram that a friend made that more clearly shows all the spots and places that you need to go. Again, look at the arena pattern and use that to help you know where you need to be. The boss isn't targetable during this, so it's totally okay to, have the diagram up while you're doing this and refer to that, and it's honestly a really easy mechanic. But with that said, everything will start to unfurl, and hopefully you'll get a clear view and an understanding of what is happening. And after you get knocked back and you have agency over your character again, be sure to stack to conclude that mechanic, and the boss will become targetable once again. Okay, triple apocalypse time. What I would consider probably the most difficult mechanic in this fight. What you want to do is follow the middle light and find where it intercepts with another light. This pizza slice will be your safe spot. As always, once the middle explosion goes off, the party will quickly rush center, and you'll have one of the tanks stay on the edge of the arena to bait Darkest Dance. Now for what makes this hard. She's going to do a knockback, but only either the back left or the back right will be safe. If you're super big brain, you could probably work this out by looking at the pathing of the light, but believe me or not, there's a really simple way, or at least I find a really simple way, to identify which way you need to get knocked back, and it has to do with the patterns on the floor. So where each of these lines coming out of the middle, around the outside of the arena, there's some decal or decoration on the floor. Usually it's a circle, and it always goes big then small, big then small. And assuming the Darkest Dance was baited correctly, you always want to get knocked back on the side of the bigger decal. So in this case you can see that there's this multi-circular pattern on the left side, whereas there's this singular circle pattern on the right side. So we want to get knocked back left. And with that, you've essentially beaten the fight. So we're going to speed through this next part here. It's just a Shockwave Pulsar followed by a Black Halo before she starts casting Terminal Relativity. Again, large hit as the same with all the other relativities. And then you're in a big heal check essentially to beat Enrage. Essentially there'll be 3 smaller AoEs, the source of which are the Quietus debuffs on the players here, followed by a Shockwave Pulsar, and there'll be 3 Shockwaves before she casts Memory's End, which is your hard Enrage. While waymarks in this fight aren't particularly important and you can just use whatever you prefer, this would be my recommendation. I don't really imagine anyone's watching this in, 2022, but anyway, thank you for watching.